What is good, my beautiful people? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I wanted to talk about what I do to get the most when it comes to video out of my Nikon Z8 and get the most cinematic footage possible. I have been shooting with the Nikon Z9 since 2022, and when the Z8 came out, I switched over to this body because it's exactly like the Nikon Z9, except just a little bit smaller and with a little bit less communication. Now, with that, there are some things that I've learned over the course of time shooting with this system and just some of the do's and don'ts. So I want to quickly cover ground on what I do to get the style of footage that I love. The first thing that we're going to talk about are just some of the settings that live on my camera. When it comes to the codec that I am personally shooting, I'm always going to be shooting in Nikon RAW using the Nikon log profile, because that's going to give me the most flexibility when it comes to color grading in DaVinci Resolve. Now, Nikon RAW is where you're going to get the most out of the resolution capabilities of this camera. Now, although this camera can shoot in 8K, I would say for the most part that my camera lives in the FX mode, 4K, 24 FPS. I don't really go up to 8K unless I need to future-proof myself when it comes to possibly exporting my project larger when those display capabilities come around. Now, when it comes to the quality of Nikon RAW, I find that for the most part, my camera lives in the normal mode when it comes to the data rate. There is a high quality rate available and you will see more detail. I just don't find that really necessary at the time. So that's just going to be a personal preference thing. Now, one of the things that I do want to make you aware of when it comes to this camera is that there are certain crop modes. And I have found personally in my use case that if I am using the 5K crop mode, I am going to see more noise in the image. So if you are going to be adapting lenses to this camera that do not use the full coverage of the full frame sensor and you need to use a DX crop mode, keep in mind that you will see more noise in the image according to what I have experienced in the camera and also according to some articles that I've seen that have backed that up too. The last major setting that I changed that comes turned on stock on this camera is the auto ISO sensitivity, even when shooting in manual mode. That's because I want the most control over my image. Outside of that, everything pretty much stays the same. I shoot in manual Kelvin, and the only other setting I really changed that's on this camera is in the custom function menu, which allows the shutter screen to come down when you turn off the camera. I like that just to keep the sensor free of dust when I'm doing lens changes, etc., depending on what type of environment that I'm in. Right now, it's summer outside, so you get all of this pollen flying around, and I don't want that stuff hitting my sensor when I have a lens off. The next thing we're going to talk about is the camera settings when it actually comes to shooting video. When it comes to shutter speed, I'm always using the 180-degree rule. So if I'm shooting at 24 FPS, my shutter speed is going to be 1/50. If I'm shooting at 60 FPS, my shutter speed is going to be 1/120. And if I'm shooting at 120 FPS, my shutter speed is going to be 1/250. So we're going to be using that 180-degree rule for the most part, unless I need to do something creatively with shutter speed. You know the rule, you know when to break it. I put a link in the description down below talking about the effects of shutter speed versus frame rate, so you can learn that rule as well and know when to break it if you already do not know. Now, the next setting that actually is pretty consistent in my camera is going to be the ISO. This camera has a dual native ISO of 800 and 4000. So on those very bright and sunny days, my ISO is going to be at 800. And when we're in low light situations where I need to get a little bit more out of the camera, I'm going to be using that 4000 ISO. This means the only real setting that changes on my camera is going to be the aperture. Now, this is dependent really on how much depth of field I want in the shot, but I'm going to be honest, I love personally shooting wide open unless I really need more detail in the background. That's something that you will notice about all of my shots. Even right now, I'm shooting with the fastest aperture possible. So this means I'm generally going to need to decrease the light that's coming onto the sensor. And this is where I'm going to use neutral density filters to cut down that light actually hitting the sensor. That's the only thing that I use outside of aperture to control the amount of light. And so this means that if I'm going to use that 4000 ISO, that I have taken away the ND, I'm shooting as fast as possible or as fast as the scene allows me to when it comes to to my aperture. So that means a lower aperture number. And if I don't have enough exposure, that's when I'll go ahead and bump up to that 4000 ISO. And sometimes that gives me so much exposure that I do need to bring neutral density back into the scene. And so it's going to be a balancing act between neutral density, aperture, and your ISO is going to stay consistent depending on the situation. The one thing that I really want you to understand about exposing with this camera is that at every cost, you want to avoid overexposure. I tend to expose a little bit brighter than I need to, because once I hit underexposure in the shadow region, I'm not going to be able to pull it back without having a lot of noise. This is even more critical when it comes to shooting in that crop mode. So I tend to expose a little bit on the brighter side, and I actually use an external monitor to do this, and I use the false color mode to really see where my highlights are and where my shadows are, and get my highlights as bright as I can get them if I'm in a very high dynamic range situation. Otherwise, I'm exposing normally, but in those high dynamic range situations, I'm pushing more to the right to get as much shadow information as possible, and then pulling it back in post and playing with the information that I have. That being said, if you don't want to use any external monitors, you can go ahead and use your waveform, which would be my favorite tool, and check to see where that highlight information is. Remember, if it's getting smushed up, that means it's probably clipping either on the top or the bottom. Or you can go ahead and use your zebras and set your highlight range to give you a safe buffer. That way you can see if things are getting too hot. We pretty much talked about everything on the settings and exposure side that I do with this camera to get the image that I love. The only things really left to talk about are my glass choices and how I rig up the camera for my movement style. Now, when it comes to glass, this is a very important aspect of telling our story, because different lenses have different characteristics. And personally for me, I tend to like more modern glass. And the reason why I like more modern glass is because I like control over the filters that I'm able to put in front of the lenses if I feel like I need them, instead of feeling like I'm 100% boxed into a certain look of a lens, unless I feel like that tells the story. So when it comes to glass that actually just fits the camera natively, there's only two sets of lenses that I really think about, and that's going to be the 35, 50, and 85 millimeter at f1.8 in the S line that Nikon offers. The only thing I feel like you're really missing out on is going to be the ability to shoot at f1.2. These lenses are clean, they have very minimal focus breathing, and the chromatic aberration is virtually gone. Now, you will get some cat eyes in the bokeh if that's something that bothers you. That being said, where I'm at personally in my career, 1.2 lenses are just kind of my standard. That comes from just being in the photography world. I've always liked having the fastest lenses possible, because that just allows me to shoot in more low light situations and feel more comfortable. And a lot of lenses look really iconic at 1.2, such as the 85 millimeter at 1.2. And my thing when it comes to camera gear is always rent it. Don't just take my word for it. See what works for you. Now, I have to say though, as much as Nikon glass is cool, I am 100% enjoying rigging up this camera with cinema glass with a PL mount adapter. Now, when it comes to cinema glass, the thing that remains the same is I like modern lenses, but I like an organic feel to them, right? So I want lenses that have virtually no chromatic aberration or virtually zero focus breathing. And I'm also looking for lenses that have an organic feel when it comes to the tonality or the rendition of colors and light with the lenses, but I don't want things such as crazy flares or barrel distortion. So you'll see me shooting with lenses like the Viltrox 1.3 Epic Anamorphics that I really like. I think the image is clean. I like the flares, but it's not too charactery where I feel like it's really just doing too much for me personally. I've shot with the Pavo 2x anamorphic lenses. I'm absolutely in love with the DZO R-less lenses, but I don't like the DZO Vespids. So it's all about personal preference. I can't say one lens is really going to work for you, because a lot of these things come down to personal preference. But that's my favorite way: cinema glass on the Z9 and the Z8. That's the way to go. The last note that I really just want to touch on is the way in which I rig my camera. I do like to rig my camera so that I have a lot of weight. I find that it really helps with the stability of hand holding. This was the way I was really able to even go about shooting everything handheld at NAB. Currently, the rig that I'm shooting with is unreleased, but I did do a rig building video. I'll also link that in the description down below, but the products aren't available yet. And I haven't come out with a full review, but I would recommend it. I mean, it's rig gear and it works. So when it comes out, I'll let you guys know on the channel. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, turn on the post notifications. If you have not, leave me a comment down below letting me know what is your favorite lens to shoot with, and are you excited for the potential new Nikon cinema glass? Yeah, that's gonna be the comment. Follow me on social media. The links are in the description down below. And remember, my beautiful people, now more than ever, if you're ever feeling uninspired, uncreative, or just want to give up on life, every day, airplanes take off against the wind. Keep climbing, stay inspired, and as always, stay fabulous. I'm Sydney. I'll see you beautiful people next time. Peace out.